Have you ever really stopped to think about what makes a woodland, a woodland? It sounds so simple, right? A bunch of trees. But the real answer is packed with these incredible hidden stories of history and ecology. Today, we're going to dig into that, using the amazing landscape around Sidmouth as our guide. So next time you're out for a walk in the woods, just pause for a second. What is that place actually telling you? Because it turns out every single tree, every little plant on the ground, it's all a clue in this giant unfolding story. So let's start with the most basic question of all. What even is a woodland? All right, so what are we actually talking about here? You might be surprised to hear that there's no single one-size-fits-all definition for woodland. But for a really solid starting point, ecologists have a system called the Phase 1 Habitat Survey. And that gives us some very specific things to look for. And here's the official breakdown. There are two key things. First, height. The trees have to be able to grow taller than 5 meters. And second, they need to form a canopy. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a thick, dark roof over your head. It can be open, but you need to be able to see that distinct layer of treetops. These are our first big clues. But, not all woods are created equal. Ecologists make this really important distinction between what they call semi-natural woodlands, the kind that look like they just grew on their own, and plantations. Those are the ones that were very obviously planted by people, whether it's for timber or even an old apple orchard. A healthy woodland isn't just a stand of trees. It's more like a multi-story building. You've got the high canopy of the tallest trees, then an understory of smaller trees and shrubs. Below that, there's a field layer with flowers and ferns, and right down on the ground, you have mosses and leaf litter. Everything from how much sunlight gets through to what animals are nibbling on things shapes this entire structure. Okay, so let's get back to our case file, Sidmouth. The researchers on the Sidmouth Nature project did something really interesting. They picked their sites based on the overall character, places that just felt like a woodland, even if they didn't meet every single scientific rule. And when you look at the map, a pattern just jumps right out at you. See that? Most of the woods are outside the town itself, sitting up on the higher ground on the sides of the valley. That location, that geography, is a massive clue to their story. And this wasn't just a gut feeling. They backed it up with cold, hard data. At every single site they surveyed, more than 60% of the plants were classic woodland species. But look at this. 3 sites, Core Hill, Riverside, and Combhead, were over 70%. That's a huge signal that these are the most established, mature woodlands in the whole area. And here's where it gets really cool. Sometimes the plants can tell you about what's been lost. This quote is just fascinating. It's saying that a plant like dog's mercury isn't just an indicator of the woods you see today, but of where a woodland used to be. It's like an ecological echo, a ghost of a landscape that's no longer there. So how do you get even more specific? To really crack the case of what type of woodland you're in, ecologists pull out their forensic toolkit. It's called the National Vegetation Classification, or NVC for short, and it lets them identify the exact plant communities at a site. And the whole investigation plays out like a classic detective story. They started with 13 suspects, native tree species that are key indicators. Right away, 6 get ruled out because they just don't belong in Sidmouth. Of the 7 that are left, only beech and ash are really common, which narrows it down to 5 possible woodland types. Then, for the final step, they look at other plant evidence, and that knocks out 4 more, leaving just the primary culprit. And after all that amazing detective work, the conclusion was crystal clear. Most of the woods in Sidmouth fall into one of 2 categories. They're either a very specific type called a W14 Beech-Bramble community, or they're an artificial plantation. And that gives us the 2 main storylines we need to follow. So, why this specific mix of woods? To understand that, we have to become historians. We've got to peel back the layers of time because the woods we see standing today are a living, breathing record of centuries of human decisions. And this story goes way, way back. In medieval times, beech was a prized tree, managed carefully for timber and firewood. Then you jump forward to the 1700s and 1800s, and people started planting these huge formal beech plantations. But the most dramatic chapter, really, came after World War II. There was a national push for timber reserves, and that led to clearing out some of those old woods and replanting them with fast-growing conifers. And the sheer scale of that change, it's staggering, 29%. Let that sink in. Nearly a third of all the ancient woodland in the entire UK, our oldest, most precious habitats, was cleared and replanted in the 20th century, mostly with conifers. That's not just a small tweak, that is a fundamental rewriting of the landscape. Which brings us right up to today, because many of those conifer plantations, the ones planted 50, 60 years ago, are now fully mature. And that means Sidmouth's woods are at another historic crossroads, about to start a brand new chapter. So this creates a huge question for the people who own and manage this land. The conifers are ready to harvest, so what happens next? The key thing is that urgent need for timber that drove all this planting in the first place, it's just not the same anymore. So land managers today have basically got four options. They can replant and just continue the commercial forestry cycle. They could let the land regenerate on its own, just see what the native seeds in the soil do. They could actively try to restore native habitats, like bringing back the original broadleaf woodland, or they can enhance what's already there, making the plantations better for wildlife. It's a total balancing act between business and ecology. The choices that are being made right now are literally writing the next chapter of this centuries-long story. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will the woodlands of Sidmouth and places just like it actually look and feel like in another 100 years? And what kind of story will they tell about us?